Hi everyone, it's Laura and I hope you're all doing really well. Today I thought I'd have a chat about some rubbish books because, you know what, I think that's quite fun sometimes, just to be a little bit mean. So what I've done is taken my list of read books on the Goodreads app and ordered them in terms of their average rating for users across the app. So this is everybody who has rated the books on Goodreads. We're looking at the general rating. So I'm kind of interested to see, out of the books that I've read, which are the ones which are really the least popular, and are people really that mean? I mean, I've only just looked at this list because I just did it just now, and I think even the lowest rating is still on average about 3 stars. Like, it's not like people have been giving ones all over the place. And I thought it would be quite interesting to see if my opinions are aligned with the general populace of Goodreads, the general literary world. So I'm going to do I was going to say top 10, but really it's a bottom 10. It's the bottom 10 average rated books that I have read on Goodreads. And number 1 is an absolute stinker of a book, I've got to say, and that is All This Has Nothing to Do With Me by Monica Sabolot, which I think is French actually and has been translated into English. And this average rating is 2.94, so that's the lowest rated book that I've read, 2.94. I feel like that's quite generous, to be honest. Although, having said that, I've apparently given this 3 stars in 2015. And I remember this being quite bad. It was like this woman who was obsessed with this person that she worked with, and it wasn't just writing. Like, some of it was writing and some of it was collections of things and stuff that she'd kept, and or receipts for things. I think there was just pictures. It was a mix of pictures and words, and I think it's the kind of thing that as an idea you might go, ooh, that's interesting. Wonder how she's managed to structure this book, and then you read it and you're like, oh, it's just rubbish. Like, it honestly felt like somebody's art piece for GCSE or something like that. Like a teenager could have written this book. It really thought it was so clever and so deep. Like, oh my god, I'm not even going to use words. I'm going to use a photograph, and you're just going to get what I mean. And it felt just really wanky. Number 2 on this list, oh, I feel even worse about this one, is Dead Girls, because this is an essay collection that Dean and I picked for our Feminist Orchestra book club, so I've made more people read this than really the book deserves. And this average rating is 3.08, so, 3 stars isn't bad. I've given it 2 stars, apparently, and the problem I found when I read this book is that it's just misadvertised. It leads you into thinking it's going to be about the obsession in American culture of dead girls, like within the media, for example, murder victims, rape victims, whatever. And you think, oh wow, this is going to be so interesting. And then it's not about that. It's about the authors moving to LA and about what it's like being a writer in LA and her trying to be Joan Didion and literally almost like word for word talking about what Joan Didion talks about when she's in LA, and then juxtaposing it with what she thinks about LA when she's there. She's like, well, Joan Didion says this, but I think when I walked down the street, I thought that. Who cares? Like, that's ridiculous. If it's been written about before, write something different. Don't write about moving to LA. And also don't advertise it as a book about dead girls. That's not what this is about. So it's just very frustrating essay collection. The essays on the topic, which I had hoped the whole collection would be on, were actually quite interesting. But it just wasn't enough to save the collection as a whole. And it just felt very sloppy. These were just essays that had been written in general, which then got published together in this one edition. And they didn't really follow on from each other, so it's very, very lazy. Number 3 on this list, which is very interesting to me, is The Gathering by Anne Enright, and that's got an average rating of 3.07 stars. And I read this, oh my god, I want to say about 10 years ago, a really, really long time ago. And I read it because one of my friends recommended it. It's Irish fiction. It's about this big Irish family, and it's about secrets within the family. And this person, I guess our narrator, is sort of going over it. And I remember thinking at the time that it was quite impressive and interesting with the way it dealt with, I guess, the weavings of emotion and history within a family and how complicated that is, and your different feelings in childhood as opposed to when you're an adult. But I was, I read it a long time ago. I was probably about a teenager or early adulthood when I read it myself. So, not trying to reduce my opinions on books when I was younger, but I hadn't read as much as I had read now. So I don't know how I would feel about it if I did read it now. But I am very surprised to find Anne Enright so low down in the average rating on Goodreads. Number 4 on this is Gwendolyn Riley, First Love, which I read in 2017. And I think this was listed I want to say for the Bailey's Prize, I think it was the Women's Prize for Fiction, this was actually, and I think shortlisted, because I remember I read it with someone, and it might have been Lauren, I can't remember, so I can't, someone else, like I buddy read this with someone, and we were both so shocked that it then got shortlisted for the prize, because I was like, this is dreadful, and it's not very long, and it was about this woman, I don't know what it was about, first love. I just remember she had this weird relationship with her mother, and that being really, really funny, but the rest of the book being very weird and not really about anything. And I mean, all I remember is it was bad. That's my memory of this book, and so it hasn't stayed with me. Number 5 of the worst books rated by Goodreads readers that I have read is The Slap by Christos Silkas. And yeah, I hated this book. I've given it 2 stars. And it says 3.19 is the average rating. What annoyed me about this book is that I thought it was about an event, which it then isn't about. So the way it was marketed is that you're at a family friend gathering, I think. There's like different families all together for this party. One of the little boys is being very naughty, and an adult who is not that child's parent slaps him. And that, I thought, was the premise for the whole book, like the repercussions across these different families and what happened. And it's literally not about that at all. It's like that happens right at the beginning, but like the slap itself isn't some kind of catalyst for what happens with the rest of these characters. I literally remember nothing other than people being Greek. Like there was a big Greek community in Australia, and one of their friends was Aboriginal, I think. And I remember thinking, oh, this is sort of more about race than it is about disciplining children or overstepping the mark. I don't know. I just felt like it could have been about so much more than it really was about. And again, it just goes to show how little I remember of the actual story. I only remember what I thought it was going to be about. Number 6 on this list is a book I read in 2017 again, and it's called Virgin and Other Stories by April Ayres Lawson. And I couldn't tell you the first thing about this book. I read it in February, apparently. I read it between, like, the whole of February, between February and March. That took me a long time. I gave it 3 stars. Number 7 on this list is Myth, A Very Short Introduction by Robert A. Segal. And I remember reading this book because I thought the very short introductions, I'd never read any of them before. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I can learn about some things. I make myself sound like an idiot, don't I? I can learn about some things. But this was not like an introduction to the concept of myth in general. It was a really academic text, and it felt like it was an introduction to this guy's specific research. And it was about how different communities like responded to a specific myth, I think, like a Greek myth, and how that is evolved in different communities. Like, I just remember reading it and being so confused about what this book was actually trying to tell me. And I thought it would be a much more general overview to the concept of myths around the world. And it just really, really wasn't. And it was really difficult to read as well. And I just remember like finishing it and being like, what on earth was that? Number 8 on this list is hilarious, and that's Satin Island by Tom McCarthy. And I read this in 2015, and this was shortlisted, in fact, for the Booker Prize that year, which is when we did the whole Man Booker thing. And so like I read it because it was on that list, and I remember really, really liking it. And I also remember Jean really, really not liking it. And it's a very weird book, and I just remember what it was about. It's one of those books that doesn't really have plot, but the main character in it is thinking about lots and lots of different things, and it touches on lots of different topics and about society. The character wasn't a character. It wasn't really about him. It was more about these different ruminations on the world. I remember certain aspects of it. Like I remember him talking about, I think he talks about like a parachute jumper at some point. I know he talks about anthropology. It's the kind of book that actually now that we've had much more scandals about like big data and society and fake news and things like that, I feel like this book would be like way more poignant, because it was really about how society was very strange and like linked together inextricably, but also kind of not linked and random. That's what I remember. Number 9 on my list is The Many by Wilmen Muir, and this was another Booker Prize, and I think this is about a fishing community, and it's about like, I just remember it being so boring. Someone's moved into a house which was occupied by this guy who had died, and the rest of the fishing village being like, oh, you've moved into his house. It just was so bad. And I remember at the end being like, none of this makes sense. There was some big like confrontation which happened between two characters, and one of them like ran up this cliff and got to this stone at the end of the cliff, and then the second one came and they had this confrontation on the cliff, and I was just like, why are you on a cliff? You could have had this conversation in a cafe. Like, other than it feels very cinematographic, I don't know, feels very much like we're in a movie because you're on this cliff. But why would you go up there to have your argument? And I just remember thinking, like, it doesn't, out of everything in this book, this is the thing that's breaking me. Like, it didn't really make any sense. I just remember being so bored. And number 10 on this list, interestingly, is The Strangest Child by Alan Hollinghurst, which I quite enjoyed. But I do know that other people don't really like his writing and don't really rate him. So that's quite interesting. This was a book which was, it's like sort of set in 3 parts, and it's about this house, essentially, and the different families who've lived in the house. And also kind of the life cycle of the house and how things change. We start in, I want to say, pre-First World War, or it might be between the wars, like it might be the 20s or something, and we have this family, a woman who's engaged to be married to someone, and then you jump to kind of post-war, and lots of different things have happened with the family, and what they thought was going to happen isn't what happened, because obviously the war got in the way. And it's a really interesting look at how truth changes. And as with Alan Hollinghurst, obviously there's a lot of gay characters in there as well, and like how that would have been kept under wraps, I suppose, in society at that time. And about, like, I mean, I really liked it. I remember really thinking it was interesting. So I would love to hear from you. 1, if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. But 2, also, I would love for you to look on your Goodreads app as well. If you are a member of Goodreads and you like track your reading there, I think it would be really interesting to hear what books that you've read are the lowest rated, and whether you agree. I filmed a similar video, which I'll link in the description box below, where I filmed my the sort of top 10 highest average ratings across the books that I've read. And with that, I felt like a lot of those books were sort of crowd pleasers, really. Like, they were books which had the most general appeal. They weren't necessarily my favourite books. But with this video, I feel like these are books that I genuinely didn't like. So that's good. I feel like I'm kind of on the cultural pulse. Everyone else seems to feel pretty similarly to me as I did about these books. But maybe disliking a book is a bit more universal, especially if, as I felt when I read these books, like a lot of them were just a bit boring or kind of missed the point of what they were trying to achieve. I don't think any of them were books where I was like, yes, this is the book I hate. I'm really pleased that it's on this list because I really, really disliked it. It's more of a general, oh, that was a bit of a failure as a read. Like, not really, didn't really inspire any strong emotions either way. So I'd love to hear from you, your opinions on these, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.